and welcome back to the Potting Shed. I'm Chris Lambert, a gardener and a lecturer in horticulture here at BCA. In this series, I'll be talking you through some garden projects suitable for this time of year, encouraging you to give some time to lesser loved plants, and once again, answering your hot topic gardening questions. Today, I talk you through how to make a bird box, explain why hellebores droop, and try to persuade you to give more love to the humble ivy. And don't forget, we love to receive your images and comments. Just share them on social media using the hashtag #ThePottingShed. In this new feature, we will be looking at some of the common plants that often get a bad rap. But as we shall see, there's often more to them than meets the eye. In this episode, we're looking at the supposed scourge of brickwork, the ivy. The Latin name for ivy, Hedera helix, comes from the Greek word hedera, to grasp or cling, whereas helix comes from the word to spiral, which goes some way to describe this plant's method of growing. The common ivy is seen as an aggressive climber, but as with all plants we shall look at in this feature, it really is a plant of many merits. This plant, which is at home in any shady corner or woodland floor, can be great for hiding any structure in your garden, and it and its many cultivars are used as one of nature's best screening plants. Ivy may like the shade, but it hunts for the sun, and as soon as its adventitious or questing shoots encounter a vertical structure, it starts to climb to the light. It uses aerial roots that form along its stem to grasp onto trunks and walls, and this is where it's often thought to cause problems as it digs into the mortar to anchor itself. Research has found that more often than not, the ivy is the thing that holds old masonry together, and is often seen to hold up a fence even when nearly rotten away. Ivy also gets a bad press when growing through trees. It doesn't damage the trunk, but can compete in the canopy for light and act as a sail in high winds in the winter when the leaves trees have fallen. It is best practice to provide a structure for ivy to grow up in the garden rather than let it do its own thing, as you can guide it rather than let it dictate to you. Ivy really comes into its own when we consider what it can do for nature. Its flowers, which bloom in the autumn, are a massive source of nectar and pollen for bees, and research has shown that some hives will rely on ivy for over 80% of its nectar and pollen needs. Ivy's nectar is rich in sugars and can really help the colony survive the winter, while the honey formed from it is incredibly floral in taste, though it does have a tendency to crystallise. It's not just bees that make use of these floral treats. Butterflies, hoverflies and a whole host of other beneficial insects utilise this late season bounty. Due to ivy forming dense clusters of foliage, it can provide excellent habitat for nesting birds and small mammals. And its berries, which form in the winter, are high in fat and essential for birds to keep them going through the leaner months. Though be warned, they are poisonous for us humans to eat. So the advice is to leave that clump of ivy alone, instead of removing it, and then even consider planting some in your garden as an excellent provider of shelter and sustenance for all your garden visitors. But do remember, a structure is always best to let it climb up. Today's question is, why is my hellebore droopy? Well, as you know, the weather this Feb has been a little bit brass monkeys, and some of our plants that are normally able to cope with these conditions are showing signs of being less than happy. We'll explore a couple of the reasons for this. Now, hellebores, known as the Christmas rose, are great plants for injecting some well-needed colour and beauty to an otherwise bleak border at this time of year. Hellebores are fully hardy and can cope with temperatures even down to -20 degrees centigrade. The plant hardiness results from the country of origin and how it's evolved to adapt to this type of climate, with those from warmer zones often being described as tender. Hellebores, like many fully hardy plants, do tend to droop in this cold weather as they struggle to access water due to the frozen ground. They do recover as the ground thaws, but in extended periods of hard frosts, they can see some processes slow down, and you may even see damage to exposed tissues. Drooping may also result from a plant arriving recently from a garden centre, where it's been most likely kept under conditions where it's been undercover and not exposed to these harsh conditions, and so it goes into a form of plant shock. Fully hardy plants won't die, but may be knocked back, recovering their form of vigour when the weather turns more clement. Either way, they should quickly recover without any intervention from yourself. If harsh weather is forecast, it's always good to check on which plants in your garden are tender, so as to identify those that may need some additional protection in order to weather this Arctic spell. In this series, we're going to show you a few little projects that you can have a go at home. And today's project is going to be making a bird box. Now, at this time of year, it's really good to start thinking about things like this, because it's always a good thing to do for nature. Because as we get into March, we're going to be starting to see mating season. And as the birds and bees kind of start going, it's really important to find them a home for their new offspring. It's a straightforward design, this, and you can have a look at the RSPB website of a whole range of different design kits for different types of birds. You can obviously pimp them up in different ways, shapes and forms, but this is a pretty standard form that we're going to make today. Nice and simple, and what we're going to do is we're going to make this out of a range of wood that we've generally found lying about, because it's always best to reduce, reuse and recycle. This is typical of wood that you'd find lying around. This is what we call gravel board. It's treated, but it's not painted, and that's the best form of wood to go for. So the most important thing is measuring, marking up, and then cutting everything to size first. And as my dad always said to me, measure twice and cut once. So if you're using recycled wood, quite often your edges are going to be a bit jagged or a little bit off square. So it's really important that we square all of these up to make your job of putting it together a lot easier. So take your set square, but if you don't have a set square, you can use a panel saw, and here, if you line that up with the wood and butt it up against that, you'll see that a lot of the saws can do a nice straight 90-degree angle there. So we have a nice straight line there as our guideline. If we put a little line on the other side as a continuation of our guideline, we can then clearly see where we're going to need to cut. So once we've cut that, we can measure the next piece of wood and then create another guideline for our next cut. If you're lucky enough to have a workbench, then make use of that. But if you don't, it's always really important to make sure your wood is firmly secured before you start sawing. Get someone to hold it, or make use of a G-clamp like we have here. Make sure that's nice and secure, and then you're ready to start cutting. We're using a panel saw. You want to make sure they're nice and sharp. If they're really blunt, you'll know about it. I hold it like I'm about to shoot a gun, so we're holding it like that, and we get it down here. Now, what I do is I use my finger here to help make sure it's sitting on that guideline, and then I do a couple of pulls. 1, 2, 3, so it doesn't jump about. I then move my hand out the way before I nicely start that cut, slow and steady, making sure it follows our guideline down and through. If your saw is catching, you may just need to kind of realign it, but if you see it going off, always just do it slowly and surely. Make sure you don't put too much effort in. Slow and steady wins the race. So make sure that you cut that neatly down that line. A wonky line is going to lead to problems later on. So now that I've cut all the pieces to shape and size, I get it all laid out on a table so I know which bit is which. It's really important to make sure you know which part is which. So for example here, which is the base, I'm going to write base on that so I don't get confused. It is sometimes difficult to nail pieces of wood together. You think it's easy, but with all wood, especially recycled wood, it can go horribly, horribly wrong. It's a good idea to pre-drill holes to help those nails go in nice and tight. But it's important to make sure that those drill bits that you use are smaller than the nail itself. Obviously don't do this on the dining room table, otherwise someone's going to be particularly cross with you. So let's put it together and we can start nailing this now. So we put our sides on, put our base in, make sure everything is lining up as it should. Remember, the first thing we're going to be doing is using these as supports whilst we knock in our front bit. It's really important that you have someone to help you. If you don't, it's not a problem, but you just need to be very careful with it. So I'm going to work one side first, obviously. I'm going to make sure everything lines up first. Get myself my nail, make sure it's not bent. Line it up, and then I'm just going to couple of taps, all the time checking, making sure everything's lining up in all parts. So I'm going to tap that in until I can feel it biting. Then I'm going to get another nail, put that in that top point. And the reason why I do this is because every time I bang one, it can throw out the other one. By having two just pinned like this, it secures it. You can even go so far as to make sure that the other end is all banged in like that before finally bringing it home. But what I'm going to do is just make sure everything's moved together using my hand to support it and then nail that. Slide your hand to the bottom of that, but make sure you've got the control. Tiny little taps are going to do nothing. Good and firm. Make sure that's all in line. And they're in nice and flush with that surface. So we work the way round, making sure everything is nice, neat, no nails are coming out. We're not making this into an Iron Maiden for birds, so we need to make sure everything is firm and secure, and then I'll take you through putting on the roof. So you can see now that we've got the whole box nicely nailed together. It's neat, it's strong, so it's going to be able to withstand the weather and last for at least a number of seasons. We need to put the roof on now. Now you can see that we've left the roof until last because it's important that the roof can actually move up and down so we can clean this out at the end of the season. It's really important that once it's up, and if you suspect that there are birds nesting in it, that you leave it alone, because otherwise the parents could disappear and leave the chicks. So only ever kind of go in after about July, August, when you think that they're fully fledged, and then clean it out ready for the next season. You don't need to put any food in. It is literally just a safe and secure home for them to live in. So what we do to make sure that it can hinge is we use a piece of plastic. Now this is a little bit of damp proof course, but traditionally you would use things like tire inner tube. Make sure you've cut enough to act as a little flap and a hinge. This also does the waterproofing of that top section. So once you know that that will work there, make sure you just remove that, and with some small pins, what's useful sometimes is roofing tacks. We literally just put some nails to secure that. You can glue, but obviously what you want is a nice, secure and tight bond. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's a little bit rough and ready, so we just make sure that we've got those. We can then put that in place, make sure we're all good there. Bring that down here. Make sure that is all nice and tight. And again, if you put them a little bit closer, when we lift that up, we've got a little hinge. That roof can go up and down. You can add a few more tacks to make it nice and secure, and that's always a useful thing to do. Now obviously the thing that we need to do now is make an opening for them. So we're going to make the hole now, the entranceway. Now it is really important that you think about the birds that are common in your garden and provide those birds with the right accommodation. The RSPB will give you guides to the size of the hole for the right bird. Most of our common garden birds, things like blue tits, will need something about 32 millimetres. Too big, then other more predatory birds can get in, so it's important to get the right size one. So we've attached the bit onto here. We've made a little mark higher up so it doesn't lead directly into the nesting material. So here X marks the spot. I make sure I position that right there in the middle and then start to make my hole. So you can see now that we've got a nice little opening here, so birds can access. We can obviously clean it out, and we've got a nice and secure palace for your garden birds. Now, quite often, once you put this up at the right time and in the right place, you'll find that they will start to come quite quickly. Make sure you secure it by screwing firmly through here. Best to put it in an area which is a little bit quieter and not right next to your front door, otherwise they won't like that kind of environment. So good luck, have a go at doing it. Don't worry if it doesn't go brilliantly first time, it's always worth a go. Thanks for joining us in the potting shed. If you have any questions, drop me a line at chrislambertgardening@gmail.com. And remember to send us your images using the hashtag #thepottingshed. And don't forget, you can still watch Series 1 on the Reading Fringe Festival website at readingfringefestival.co.uk.